Well, it's Monday, and welcome back from the weekend. It was an eventful one, a busy one, especially for Republican presidential candidates who had not one, but two debates in a 12-hour period, one Saturday night, one Sunday morning. And they're talking a whole lot, and we're hearing a whole lot. But I want to take this opportunity to talk about what we're not hearing. And I think this is important, because as much as social issues can make for great sound bites, we're in the midst of some tough times. And if you're applying for a job in which your number one priority is to lead this country in a better direction, it might be a good idea to start telling people, the ones who will eventually decide whether or not you'll get the job, what your plan is. That would make sense, right? Well, wrong. This weekend and for much of the campaign season, instead it's been about three things: guns, gays, and God. So I want to show you a couple snippets from over the weekend.
Governor Romney, do you believe that states have the right to ban contraception?
States have a right to ban contraception. I can't imagine a state banning contraception.
As far as selling contraceptives, the Interstate Commerce Clause protects this.
The sacrament of marriage was based on a man and woman, has been for 3,000 years, is at the core of our civilization, and is something worth protecting and upholding.
My view is we should have a federal amendment of the Constitution defining marriage as a relationship between a man and a woman.
That does not mean that I would agree with certain things that the gay community would like to do to change laws with respect to marriage or respect to adoption.
Contraception, gay marriage, these are issues that get people riled up, for sure. But they're not issues that really have much bearing on the majority of people's lives in this country. So what are those issues, you may be asking? Well, here's a few we want to look at. Foreclosed homes. Several million families have faced or are facing losing their homes to foreclosure. Has anyone heard Mitt Romney or Newt Gingrich's plan to deal with this problem? Also, what about the crisis in the Eurozone and how much it impacts not just the rest of the world, but this part of the world, this economy as well? What about government programs like Social Security and Medicare literally running out of money? And also, what about our policy in the Middle East for the years ahead? We've, of course, heard bomb Iran, and we've heard grow the military. But what specifically should be done in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Bahrain, and in Iraq? And finally, and this one is pretty simple, it's in our faces every day: poverty and inequality. What does Rick Perry think needs to be done about the growing homeless populations across this country and about widespread inequality in America? Well, instead, the scales of these debates are often tipped in the direction of, again, the three G's: God, gays, and guns. So why so little attention on things that actually impact the majority of this country? Well, the Republican candidates might be afraid to give their opinions on things that matter, but earlier I spoke to someone who isn't afraid to give his opinion about anything. Seton Motley, the president of Less Government. I asked him to answer why the GOP is so focused on the wrong issues. Here's his take.
Because 25% of the questions last night from the Stephanopoulos joke fest that was the media were about either contraception or gay marriage. All the candidates can do is answer the questions they're asked. And if they're asked a bunch of inane, stupid, irrelevant questions, Newt Gingrich demolishing Stephanopoulos, and rightly so, for asking all these questions, the only better follow-up would have been to say, why aren't we talking about the terrible Obama economy? Why aren't we talking about the fact that the only reason unemployment is only 8.6% is because much of the workforce has given up and stopped looking for work, and the official workforce number has shrunk. And if the workforce were as big now as it was when Obama entered office, the unemployment rate would be 10.9%.
So why aren't the candidates doing that? Why aren't they saying, hey, you know, people don't care about contraceptives?
Well, they pretty much did. I mean, look, the only mistake they made on Saturday night was agreeing to a debate with George Stephanopoulos as the moderator. That was the only thing. I mean, beyond that, they can't control what Stephanopoulos is going to ask them once they agree to have Stephanopoulos moderate the debate.
But what about seeing this notion that a lot of people, and I know you know as many as I do, a lot of people vote with their head, with their hearts and not their head. A lot of people are one-issue voters. They vote on whatever candidate agrees with them most about guns, about abortion, especially in places like Iowa and New Hampshire. I mean, certainly I'm not getting the media out of responsibility for this, because you're right, they're not always asking the right questions. But
well, they don't want to. Well, the media is incredibly biased. They don't want to ask about the economy because it reflects very poorly on the incumbent president they want to see reelected. So they're not going to ask about that.
But Fox News has hosted plenty of debates, and
they ask all kinds of questions about the economy. I mean, Chris Wallace does, Brett Baer does, Megyn Kelly does. The last debate was, they were three of the moderators. They asked a bunch of questions about the economy, and we're very hard on the candidates too, I might add.
But it's not just the economy too. It's also things like, what is your specific, simple policy for what the U.S. role is in Afghanistan, in Iraq in the future, in Libya?
Well, they talked about that, and I think Perry screwed up by saying he wants to send troops back to Iraq. I mean, I, for one, think that if we stayed there 100 years, on 100 years in one day, Iran would take over. So that's irrelevant. But no, they're asked about it and they answer it. And this debate was particularly galling and particularly bad because George Stephanopoulos was a particularly terrible moderator.
Well, there was also another debate. I don't know if you woke up early yesterday morning to watch the Meet the Press Facebook debate. And there were, it was a little bit less social issue oriented. But it's not just the debates, Seton. It's also the speeches that these people are making, their stump speeches when they're traveling around. And I want to show you something really quick because we're not making this up. These are issues that, like you said, the economy and jobs that people actually care about. So I want to show something that was caught over the weekend by an ABC News crew.
Romney, son of a millionaire worth at least $200 million himself, we have no jobs, has been struggling to connect with the economic fears of the working class.
So you see this crying woman hugging Romney. He looks a little uncomfortable with this emotional outburst. But she's telling like it is. We need jobs. Do you think people need to kind of remind the candidates to talk about this a little more?
Well, I think they'd be very happy to talk about it. The problem is, again and again and again, they're confronted with questions that have nothing to do with any of it.
But again, not just the debates. When they're out taking questions
from
people,
all the time.
and when they're out giving speeches, of course they say we need more jobs or we need to cut taxes.
And remember, you're looking at this through an Iowa prism, which is a very socially conservative.
And now a New Hampshire prison.
Well, no, but we're still transitioning.
Right.
All the tape we're looking at is from a month plus of them campaigning in Iowa. And that's a very socially conservative state where social issues are very prominent, i.e. Rick Santorum almost winning from coming out of nowhere. So I think we have to remember that as we go to New Hampshire, again, this highlights how bad Saturday night's debate was. This is the New Hampshire debate, where they don't care almost at all about social issues. And George Stephanopoulos goes on his latex jihad.
But, as somebody who watches not only the debates, but a lot of the speeches that these candidates make, and they can put anything they want in these speeches. They want to sell themselves to the American people, to the voters. Certainly on their website, they may have, plans for everything that we're talking about here, but they're not telling it to their audiences. They're not talking about things like the fact that, Social Security and Medicare are very much in jeopardy. These government programs
are
almost out of money, but they don't.
They talk about it all the time.
They complain about it, but they're not giving their plans for what to do. They're not talking about poverty or how to end homelessness.
Rick Perry was lambasted for rightly calling Social Security a Ponzi scheme.
He didn't say what he would do.
Yes, he did. He offered a plan. Yes, he did.
It wasn't a feasible plan.
Which, of course, it was feasible. Just the left didn't like it, which is their definition of unfeasible.
Well, the left is not who's going to be voting for these candidates.
Well, the Democrats are allowed in, which is why Ron Paul did as well as he did in Iowa. That's an absurd practice that needs to go away. But no, Rick Perry talked about private accounts. George Bush in 2004 talked about private accounts. We have to privatize Social Security because the government now, the debt is higher than the national GDP. We have to privatize this. We have to bring the free market into it because the government's killing it.
I mean, that's certainly Seton Motley's opinion, but
it's also true.
A lot of these candidates, though, and that's what I'm talking about today, a lot of these candidates are really spending more time kind of wanting some zingers and wanting, the people at their speeches that show up just to remember them based on very simple things that don't apply to the majority of American people.
Every single candidate has an economic plan. Romney's is, I think, the worst. Wall Street Journal called it the worst. But every single one of them, everybody lambasted Herman Cain for the 999 plan. Perry's talked about an 18% flat tax and reforming the tax code. Rick Santorum has got an economic plan that's been called more aggressive and more conservative than Newt Gingrich has a plan to, I think, eliminate capital gains taxes. They all have economic plans. If the media's not going to write about them and they're not going to be asked about them at debates, it's not their fault.
I think that's a fair point. Do you think, just last question for you, do you think the candidates need to do a better job kind of explaining them simply? Or do you think that they've done just perfect in terms of like some of these bigger issues?
I think a lot of the Republican primary voters, despite the media's ignoring them, know what the issues are, know what the economic plans are, these different candidates, and are voting in large part according to which one they like better. So, I think this is happening despite the media, not because of it, the fact that we're advancing the ball in the Republican primary. And I think that we're going to continue to see ridiculous questions coming from ridiculous moderators. And that's not the candidate's fault.
All right, Seton Motley, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you very much.